Okay, today we start episode number 53, which means now season 2, episode 1 of the Father Friend podcast. If you've been with me, thank you. If you're just starting, welcome. So, regarding today's subject, let's be honest right out of the gate. You can control your kids at least for a while. Every dad knows this. You raise your voice, tighten the rules, pull rank, drop consequences, and for a season, especially when they're young, it works. They comply, they fall in line, they do what you say. But if we're honest, something else is happening underneath all that. You may be getting behavior, but you're not necessarily shaping the heart. And over time, that gap starts to matter more than most dads realize. Because what works when they're young doesn't always translate as they grow. And if you don't adjust, what once worked for you will begin to work against you. Control has a shelf life. At some point, and every dad hits this moment, whether he's ready for it or not, authority alone loses its effectiveness, especially when it comes to influencing your child. The same approach that worked when your son was 6 starts to fall flat when he's 16. And if you don't recognize that shift and cooperate with it, you don't just lose control, you lose influence. Father at 16 the way you did at 6, and you'll not build the connection you actually want. And influence is the whole game. Control might get behavior in the moment, but influence shapes who they become over time. It shapes how they think, how they decide, what they believe when you're not in the room. And that's what we're after as dads, not just compliance, but conviction. That's the shift every dad has to make from control to influence. And that's what we're talking about today. Now, before we go further, let's make sure we don't swing too far the other direction, as some podcast and parenting experts do. Authority is not the enemy. Your authority as a father is good. It's necessary. It's God-given. Your kids need it. They need boundaries. They need direction. They need someone willing to step in and say, no, that's not who we are, or no, you're better than that. But authority was never meant to be the finish line. It's a starting point. Authority gives you a voice early on, but influence determines whether they keep listening later. You can have authority and still lose your child's heart. You can win the moment, lose the relationship. You can get compliance and really miss connection entirely. But beyond authority, credibility builds influence. Want to know how you can tell the difference in what you possess with your child? Here it is. If your child only listens when they have to, you have authority. But if they listen when they don't have to, you have influence. Now, let's unpack this as we move forward. So there are really two kinds of leadership in the world, and how you live them out shapes everything in your home. The first is positional leadership. That's when your authority to lead comes from your title or role. You're the dad. That carries weight, and it should, especially when your kids are young. They need directive leadership. They thrive with structure, with limits, with clear expectation. And there's nothing wrong with reminding your kids that you have authority in the home. But here's the tension every dad eventually runs into. When the title becomes your primary tool, you've stopped leading and started demanding. Authority without credibility is just power for power's sake. Your kids may, again, comply in the short run, but compliance isn't the goal. You want transformation, and transformation follows your character, your love, and your sacrifice, not just a title. The second kind of leadership is personal leadership, and this is where it gets good. Personal leadership is built on that character, who you are, how you treat your family, and how your presence makes them feel. It doesn't just give you a voice, it makes your kids want to listen. That's the kind of leadership that earns influence, and it's the kind that lasts. We were at Disney World toward the end of a long, exhausting week, and my patience was wearing thin. Crowds, lines, blazing heat. At breakfast that morning, I'd already warned my 5-year-old son about standing in his seat and reaching for things on the table. Well, guess what? Sure enough, he wanted the syrup, so he stood up in his chair, reached across the table, and knocked it over. Well, I snapped. I grabbed his arm, got in his face, and with an intense, muffled voice, I said, "I told you to sit down. Look what you've done." I physically intimidated my little boy, and it terrified him. He began crying, not a fussy cry, but a frightened one, and then he reached for his mom. Now, that wasn't discipline. That was a grown man losing control and taking it out on a child who was just being, well, a child. Now, should he have stood up? No. But my response was way overboard. I apologized later and apologized to him many times since, but the look on his face in that moment still stays with me. In that moment, I had authority, but I lost influence. Because influence isn't just about the tool you use, it's about the posture you lead from. Now, let me give you a completely different moment. Years later, we're sitting in the living room. This same child is older now, navigating a real decision. Not a small one, a pretty big one with real consequences. And I had opinions about it, strong opinions. I could feel it rising in me, the urge to step in, to direct, to control the outcome. Everything in me wanted to say, here's what you're going to do. But I didn't, because he was old enough to make this decision himself. So I paused, and instead of giving direction, I asked a question. What do you think is the right move here? And there was a pause, not a quick answer. And he thought about it. Then I asked another one. What matters most to you in this decision? We sat there and talked it through, not rushing, not correcting, just processing. I asked, he answered, I listened, then I asked again. At one point, he said, I'm not sure. And instead of me jumping in, I stayed there with him. Okay, let's think through this together. So we walked through the options, the trade-offs, the implications, and slowly you could see it happening. He was thinking, not reacting, not guessing what I wanted to hear, actually thinking for himself. And he landed on the right decision, not because I forced it, not because it was my decision, but because he owned it. As the conversation ended, he said something simple, but it stuck with me. Thanks for helping me think through that. Now that's influence. No command, no pressure, no control, but my voice was still present, still shaping, still guiding, and that's what we're after. Now, obviously, you cannot do that thing with a 5-year-old compared to a 15-year-old, but that's the goal. That's where you're heading, and the things that you do now will lead to that at some point in time. Act now in the ways that will build credibility. So there are 5 times when not to use authority. Here's where I want to get practical, because recognizing these moments, learning to read the room as a father, is one of the most important skills you'll ever develop. Here's number 1. Don't use authority when your child needs to be heard more than directed. There are times your kid doesn't need a solution right away. They don't need you to fix it. They don't need correction. And the second they open their mouth, they don't need to hear something from you necessarily. What they need first is to feel understood. And if you move too quickly into fixing, you miss the connection. You jump past the person and get to the problem, and your child notices. Here's what happens over time when you do that repeatedly. Your child stops bringing things to you, not dramatically, not all at once, just gradually. They start processing life somewhere else with friends, online, alone, because they've learned that when they come to you, they're going to get a lecture before they get a listener. Influence starts with listening. And listening is not passive. It's one of the most active, intentional things you can do as a father. Ask a question and then actually wait for the answer. Don't fill the silence. Don't rush to the point. Let them get there. Because when your child feels heard, they become open, and open kids let you in. Number 2, when the issue is about growth, not safety. There are moments when you must step in, no question. Safety, integrity, character, when there's high risk, when those things are on the line, you step in and you don't apologize for it. That's your job. But a lot of life is not like that. A lot of life is just learning. It's your teenager making a mediocre decision about his time. It's your daughter picking maybe the wrong friend for a season. It's your son failing a class because he didn't manage his schedule well. And as painful as it is to watch, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let it happen and then be there when it does. Because if you control every decision, every outcome, every step, you rob your child of the chance to develop judgment. You don't raise a strong young man or woman, you raise someone who always needs direction, who is prompt dependent, someone who doesn't know what to do when dad isn't there to tell them. Influence creates space for growth. It trusts them enough to let them stumble, and it's close enough to help them back up. That's hands-off parenting. That's strategic parenting. You're developing a thinker, not just a follower. Number 3, when you're reacting emotionally instead of responding intentionally, don't express authority. This is where most of us get tripped up, and if we're honest, it's the one that sneaks up on us the most. You're tired, you had a long day, you've asked multiple times, and now it's not even about the issue anymore. It's about your frustration, your irritation, the fact that you feel disrespected, ignored, or just done. And in that moment, you reach for authority not because it's the right tool, because it's the fastest one. That's where authority turns into force. And force doesn't lead, it just dominates. Strong fathers don't just lead their kids, they lead themselves first. Because here's what's true. Your anger in time becomes your child's anxiety. When your presence feels unpredictable, they never quite know which version of dad is walking through the door. Your influence weakens. They start managing you instead of trusting you. They learn to read your mood before they risk a conversation, and that's not the dynamic you want. The Disney moment I described earlier, that was me reacting, not responding. There's a real difference between those two things. Reacting is automatic, responding is intentional, and your kids feel the difference every time. So before you reach for authority in a heated moment, pause. Even 10 seconds changes the outcome. Ask yourself, am I leading right now, or am I just venting? Because one builds connection, the other damages it. The 4th time not to use authority is when the relationship is strained. Okay, if there's already distance between you and your child, if there's tension, if communication is broken down, if they've pulled back, authority won't fix it. It will expose it. Trying to control your way back into connection never works. It only widens the gap. Because authority in a strained relationship doesn't feel like leadership, it feels like pressure. And kids who already feel disconnected from their dad don't respond to pressure by getting closer. They respond by going further away. Correction without connection feels like rejection. And when a child feels rejected by their father, they resist even good leadership. It doesn't matter if you're right. It doesn't matter if your correction is completely fair. If the relational foundation isn't there, the message won't land the way that you intend it to. So if the relationship is strained, that's where you start, not with rules, not with correction, with presence, with humility, with a conversation that isn't about fixing them. Create space for them to talk, show up consistently, even when they don't respond right away. Rebuild the bridge first, then your leadership has somewhere to walk. Number 5, the 5th time that you're not to express authority is when you're aiming for long-term impact, not short-term compliance. This one requires you to zoom out and ask a bigger question. What am I actually trying to accomplish here? You can force behavior today, we've established that, but you cannot force belief. And belief is what lasts. Belief is what shows up, again, when you're not in the room. Belief is what drives decisions at 22 when they're navigating something you don't even know about. You can control their actions, again, for a season. You cannot control their convictions. Those have to be developed. Here's the thing about conviction, their conviction. It doesn't come from compliance. It comes from ownership. When your child works through a decision with you, wrestles with it, lands on it themselves, that becomes part of who they are. It forms them. But when you just tell them what to do and they do it to keep the peace, the lesson ends the moment the pressure does. If your goal is just obedience, authority might be enough. But if your goal is transformation, if you want your voice to matter still in their life when they're 30 and facing something hard, then you need influence. And influence is built slowly through 1,000 small moments where you choose connection over control, questions over commands, patience over pressure. So the question shifts. Not how do I get them to listen to me, but how do I become someone they trust enough to listen to? That's a different question, and it produces a different kind of father. Your authority may control your child's behavior, but your character shapes their heart. Just because you carry the title dad doesn't mean you automatically have your child's trust. That's got to be built through consistency, through humility, through listening, through owning it when you're wrong, through showing them that your leadership is not about power, but about their good. Scripture gives us a clear picture of this. In 1 Thessalonians 2, Paul says he could have asserted his authority as an apostle, but he was gentle among them, like a nursing mother caring for her children. He shared not only his message, but his very life because they had become so dear to him. No posturing, no pulling rank. He led through relationship and genuine love. And then just a few verses later, he shifts to the father image. He describes how a father exhorts, encourages, and implores his children so they walk in a manner worthy of God. Not commands and controls, exhorts, encourages, implores. That's not archaic. That's exactly what every kid needs from their dad. And Jesus modeled this perfectly. He had all authority, every right to use power however he wished, and yet he never used it for himself. He led through service, through relationship, through sacrifice. He didn't force people to follow him. He lived in a way that made people want to. None of those are complicated concepts, but they will cost you something every single day. And that's exactly why they build credibility, because your kids know what it costs. And when they see you pay it anyway, that's when they start to trust you. And trust is what carries into adulthood. It shapes your relationship for decades. It keeps your voice present long after your authority fades. It's what makes your kids call you when they're 30 and facing something hard, not again because they have to, but because they trust you. So hold the tension, use your authority, don't give it up, but don't rely on it as your only tool. Lead with strength, build trust, step in when it matters, but step back when stepping back grows them. Because the goal is not to control your child's life. It's to prepare them to lead their own, to trust their voice so one day they trust their own voice. Not control, connection, not compliance, trust. That's the shift. And every dad has to make it.